occasion that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the former Soviet Union, and he has largely said that the Eurasian Union that he is trying to build is, in effect, an effort to recreate the old USSR, and he's been using the power assets of Russia, its energy resources, to force all of his neighbors into this kind of a union. And as you know, this has led to a really substantial war. I think that the war in Ukraine has been very much underestimated by the world in terms of its long-term consequences. This is a war that has already killed about 4,000 people, produced 10,000 wounded, about 500,000 internally displaced people, and it is not over. This war is not over. Putin has essentially upset the entire post-1991 European settlement. In 1991, when the former Soviet Union broke up, everybody was terribly worried that this whole region, the former USSR, would turn into a giant Yugoslavia, because as you can see, there are many Russian populations stranded outside of Russia. And I think everybody breathed a sigh of relief when the Yeltsin government at that time basically said, we are not going to come to the assistance of these Russian-speaking populations. By annexing Crimea, Putin has basically thrown that arrangement out the window. This is not a situation that he can control, although he may think that he can. And I think the shooting down of MH17, the Malaysian jetliner, this past summer is an indication of that. I'm sure that Putin did not want that jetliner shot down, but he has unleashed a kind of grassroots nationalism that he is not, in the end, going to be able to fully control. And I think that one of the things that's extremely disturbing, so I did my dissertation on the former Soviet Union, Soviet foreign policy. I used to travel to the USSR a lot in the 1980s. There was a lot of propaganda at that time. And the thing about Russia then was that nobody believed anything the government said. They all said, yeah, the government's lying. What's very frightening about the current situation is that Putin is believed, despite the fact that he's been lying constantly since the beginning of this Ukraine crisis, that the Ukrainians shot down the airliner, that the Ukrainians are crucifying children in Kiev, and so forth. And again, this is has produced a grassroots change in the view of all of these Russian populations. Putin has also pioneered a very different kind of warfare in which he's using what's called asymmetrical warfare, that is to say, not using conventional forces in a conventional way. It's very different from the United States. The United States likes shock and awe. They like big invasions and massive use of force. Putin has done largely the opposite in order to blunt the effect of Western sanctions. And so this is a column of armored personnel carriers that constitute so-called volunteers, and it's led to deniability in terms of the Russian position as to what they're doing in Ukraine. Now, the thing about this particular conflict is that it is driven, I think, ultimately by a lot of nostalgia for the old USSR, for great power status, but Putin, unfortunately, has a very weak hand to play. So, as I'm sure you're aware, the ruble has crashed over the months since the crisis broke out. It coincided with the decline in oil prices. Russia has on the order of 450 billion in dollar reserves. About 100 billion of those are tied up in non-liquid assets. He's already spent perhaps 80 billion trying to defend the ruble. Next year, there are a lot of big Russian companies, Rosneft and Gazprom and Russian railways, all of which have large dollar-denominated debts that are going to come due, and he is going to face a really, really severe choice. Now, this is one where I'm very uncertain as to how to predict the short-term behavior, because the economics predicts that he should back down, but he's got a lot of problems. For example, Crimea. He took over Crimea last spring, but it is cut off from the rest of Russia. It is completely dependent on Ukraine for electricity and water, and a couple months ago, the Ukrainians cut both of them off. The Russians had basically no way of keeping this peninsula supplied, and this suggests that he is going to have to open up a corridor to Crimea, regardless of how he wants to try to blunt or mitigate the European and American effort to sanction